Welcome back to the Life Coaching Systems Weekly Podcast, Episode 2. We took a little break in programming, but we're back on schedule now. It's so good to be back on air to talk to our numerous viewers that we have online. I'm your host, Dr. Kenneth Hudson, for this episode on suicide prevention. Suicide prevention, such a big topic because September is Suicide Prevention Month on the calendar, but our emphasis is on it every day. We want to put an emphasis on suicide prevention every day because it's so important. I know that this topic is depressing for a lot of people. We don't never like to talk about depressing things like suicide, but it is a fact of life. But it is good to discuss things that upset people because it's like medicine. It's very good for you. You've guessed it. That's right. It's just me flying solo today. I will carry on the best that I can with this podcast. But the question is, what can I say about suicide from the perspective of a psychologist, a life strategist, or a life coach? And the question, I can answer that by saying I can say a lot about it because it is something that we deal with day in and day out about dealing with the problems that people have. Just dealing with the problems that people have. And some of those problems have to do with how people feel about themselves, which sometimes leads to suicide. We've been taught all of our lives to say nothing when we hurt emotionally or mentally. I know I've been in that situation where some things would bother you and you can't talk to anyone about those things. That sometimes in our culture it's taboo to even talk about mental health issues. You say mental health and you can clear a room really quick because people don't want to hear anything about mental health issues. That one principle in psychology says this: if you ignore the problem will go away. I'm going to repeat that again. It says that if you ignore the problem will go away. We know that that's a lie. The problem will not go away. Most of the times that the problem gets bigger and bigger and bigger because you ignored the problem. Have you ever had a problem that you ignored and the problem came back larger in size? That's what happens. And we know that that's a lie. We solve problems by confronting them head on. We confront problems because we believe we can't be like the ostrich by putting your head in the sand to ignore the problem. Many have been lost in our culture because of this code of silence, suffering in silence. Think about all the people who have difficulties that they suffer in silence. Men in our culture view mental health issues as a form of weakness, that you're less of a man, that real men don't cry, that you should suck it up, that you should not complain or whine about anything, or with women that you're a superwoman, that you can do anything, that you don't need anybody, that you're independent, that you could do everything. And we know that's just not true. We are working hard to dispel these myths in life coaching systems. We're working hard because they're myths that hurt us to the core. There's so many people who have difficulties, who have problems, who have trials, who cannot talk about these things. And we want to be able to talk about the things that are finally bothering us. The church, yes, I said it, is an institution that we love so much, but it's an institution also that's done so much damage to us as a culture, as a people of color. It's done damage to us about how we should act and the things that how we should feel certain things. The church has perpetuated these myths that suicide is a white thing. You heard what I said, that the church has perpetuated that suicide is a white thing and that people of color are accustomed to struggling through life challenges. Have you ever been to church and they'll tell you that, oh, this too shall pass, and you wonder when it is gonna pass. When should this pass? That we're used to struggling with everything. That old adage that through suffering there's redemption, without succumbing to suicide. But it's a myth that the people of color do not die from suicide. Do you know personally any person of color who's taken their lives? Think about it for a moment. Do you know anybody in your circle of friends, in your family, co-workers, neighbors who have taken their lives? We might have called it an accident, or we might have called it that they took too much medicine, or whatever it's called, but they took their lives. We have to look at the source of where they got it from. You know, how many of you have been suffering for years due to believing that this type of suffering is just a part of life? You might say, Dr. Hudson, it's just a part of life. You got to go on with your life. You're complaining too much. That's a part of life. You suffer with things. You've heard people say you got to die from something, but that's not true. Afraid to speak to anyone about this real pain you feel. We're afraid that people will see us differently if we speak about the pain that we feel. You know, even our societies are now so stressful and toxic that it seems to breed racism and sexism that is associated with thoughts of suicide. The pressures and stress come from every source in life. You go to work, there's pressure, there's stress. You go home, there's pressure, there's stress. You interact with friends, there's pressure, there's stress. It's everywhere. But suicide is a serious public health problem that has long-lasting effects on individuals, families, and communities. But the good news is this, that is totally preventable. It's totally preventable. I'm going to say it again, that suicide is totally preventable. You can prevent this. We know that suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. It's responsible for more than 47,500 deaths in 2019 alone. In 2019, 12 million American adults thought about suicide. 3.5 million planned suicide. And 1.4 million attempted suicide. That's one death every 11 minutes, I might meant to say. And that's a very sobering statistics. How many of you have known someone who's committed suicide? Or even yourself who've contemplated suicide? You had a plan, you had the means to do it, you were going to go ahead and do whatever you wanted to do. And you thought that if you committed suicide, the pain would end. There's a difference between psychological pain and physical pain. Psychological pain weighs on you. It bears into you each and every day. People suffering from psychological pain. You know that suicide affects all ages. It's the second leading cause of death for people ages 10 to 34. The fourth leading cause among people ages 35 to 44, and the fifth leading cause among people ages 45 to 54. It encapsulates every different age group. Suicide affects all different types of black people, white people, all social economic strata, rich, poor, middle class. It doesn't matter who you are. Suicide affects all of us. You know that people who have experienced previous suicide attempts, violence in their lives, child abuse, mental illness like depression, bipolarism, social isolation, job loss, criminal problems, substance use disorders have a higher risk of suicide. Think about that. The things that I described hit almost every area where people have problems. We've been locked in during this pandemic. The social isolation is killing people, that they can't go out and do what they want to do. That's the thing about it, that the stress of the COVID-19 pandemic has increased the number of suicides in communities of color. That the statistics show that the most of the gun deaths are suicide. Let that sink in right there. You hear about something on the news, it's some gun violence, and some of those, they never describe what it is, but really it's suicide. Suicide by cops, somebody that's upset with their life, they call 911 and they come out with a gun, and the police are trained to shoot you down. Suicide by cop. Have you ever heard about it? They'll just say, well, that person was crazy. They went crazy. They had a mental health breakdown, but they came out with a gun. They came out with a knife. They came out with, they knew that the police was going to use lethal means in that situation. It's just suicide. The jump in suicides in people of color coincides with isolation, job losses, all the people who lost jobs, lockdowns. This time last year, we were locked in the house. We could not go anywhere. The reminders of sickness and so many deaths. Over 600,000 people plus have died during this pandemic. That's a lot of people. You cannot replace that many people. Over 600,000 people have died. Gone. But that research has shown that white Americans have a higher rate of suicide than people of color. That's what we've always been taught. The research has showed that Caucasian people commit suicide more, at a greater frequency than people of color. Also, men use more lethal means. They'll shoot themselves, guns, they might run a car into the wall. Men don't like to talk about depression or any mental health issue at all. As men, we don't want to talk about those things. That women use non-lethal means to commit suicide. Drugs, carbon monoxide, other non-lethal methods. But people of color have difficulties accessing care and limited insurance, which adds to the suicide rate. We need mental health, but we don't know where to go get the mental health. We have a stigma in trying to attain the mental health services we need. We can't tell mama, we can't tell dad, we can't tell sister, because they'll look at us funny, because they say, if you have got to have mental health, that means there's something wrong with you. It got to be something wrong with you. We're further stigmatized. If you're part of the LGBT community, a trans community, the suicide rate is even higher. To be a person of color, to be trans in the LGBT community, is also carries with it a stigma. You can't talk to anybody. You're ostracized further, even in our community. But there are also warning signs of suicide. They're indicators that a person may be in acute danger and may urgently need help. These people are in acute danger. It's just like a flashing red light going off. They need help. We should be able to understand the warning signs of suicide as a lay person, as a person that we see every day. We should be able to know the warning signs. Talking about wanting to die, to kill oneself, is a warning sign, as a danger sign of suicide. Looking for a way to kill oneself is a warning sign. Talking about feelings of hopelessness or having no purpose is a warning sign. Talking about being trapped or being in an unbearable pain is a warning sign. Talking about being a burden to others. You see people who are sick and they said, I just don't want to be a burden on people anymore. I want this thing to end. Increasing the use of alcohol or drugs. Maybe you have a family member that's drinking and drugging, and you just, wait a minute, it's the behavior that they have is uncharacteristic of them. Acting anxious, agitated, reckless, sleeping too much, sleeping too little is a warning sign of suicide. Withdrawing or feeling isolated is a warning sign. showing rage or talking about seeking revenge. A lot of times our people will be angry. We say, we know that, why are they so angry? Because that anger will mask those other things like depression and suicidal tendencies. We have to look for those things. Displaying extreme mood swings, giving away all your possessions. All of a sudden they want to give away their car. All of a sudden they want to give away something they value so much. And you say, why are they giving me these things? We have to be careful, because these things are warnings as acute danger, and they may need urgent help. They need help. That's the thing about it, that sometimes people want help. They don't know how to ask for help, but they want help. You may ask the question, with all the bad news, how in the world can we prevent suicide? That's the $1 billion question. How in the world can I prevent suicide? How can I do this? How can I prevent suicide? We must first don't discount people's feelings. Don't poo-poo on people's feelings. If a person says that they feel bad, or they feel depressed, let's take them at face value that they do feel bad, that they do feel depressed, that men do feel bad sometimes, that men do feel depressed sometimes. We shouldn't ask our women, you should smile more often, because a smile like, wait a minute, maybe they don't feel like smiling. We try to force the emotion on people. Look at suicide as a cry for help. We should look at suicide as a cry for help. Encourage them to get professional help. Seeing a psychologist such as myself, or a counselor, a mental health therapist. Getting professional help is a good start. Sometimes people need help. They need somebody to take them to the doctor. They need somebody to take them to the therapist. Ask about suicidal feelings. You should be right up front. When you're talking to a person about suicide, are we talking about suicide? Get right to it. Don't beat around the bush. Don't say, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Don't do that. Ask the person, are we talking about suicide? Are you thinking about committing? So get right to the point. Confront them with the information that you have. That's what you have to do. You got to get right to the point. Don't leave them alone. Don't leave them alone. If somebody call you, go right to them. Don't find a way, have the police check them. Don't leave them alone. Know that secrets can kill. You know that people will be carrying secrets, and the secrets will be just bearing away, wasting them away each and every day. They carry these secrets, and we'll say, I can't tell because they told me not to tell anybody. And we'll find out that person committed suicide, because if a person is in harm, please let somebody know. Let somebody know that they're thinking about hurting themselves. They're thinking about suicide. Let someone know about that. We should all be more aware of the things that the people are doing in our lives. Have you ever known in a situation where you could have intervened in a person's life? You could have intervened. You saw that they were in a crisis, and that you went the other way, and that you found out the next day that person had committed suicide, and that if you had just said one thing, if you had just intervened right at that moment, if you had just taken the time out to talk to that person, you could have prevented this. That's what we have to do. We have to take the next step to keep people from committing suicide. We got to act as these are our family, which they are. They are our family members. We have to take our due diligence is to do everything to prevent suicide, because we said before, it's totally preventable. It's totally preventable. It's up to us. It's up to us to prevent suicide, because these are the people that we love. These are people that we need. And these are the people that we care about each and every day. September is Suicide Prevention Month. Let's do our part in being part of the solution. Well, I wanted to thank you for listening to Life Coaching Systems Incorporated podcast number 2 with our topic this week, suicide prevention. You can find additional show notes on our website. Our next podcast will focus on how to build a solid relationship and good communication skills. You don't want to miss that. I hope I have a co-host for that. I don't know yet. I probably will, but I'm just excited about doing these podcasts, of bringing relevant information out over the internet. You can reach us on our website at www.lifecoachingsystem.org, on Facebook at Awakening007, or YouTube at Dr. Kenneth Hudson Life Coaching Systems Incorporated. And of course, you can show your support through Cash App. That's Cash at Rattlers, RATTLERS at 006, or at www.lifecoachingsystems.org. Remember, we're still in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic with the deadly Delta variant. Please get the vaccine if possible. It's the only way we'll get back to a normal life. People of color are 3 times more likely to contract the COVID-19 virus. Also remember to wear a mask, wash your hands, and practice social distancing. God bless you today.